Welcome, everybody. As we let people in, I suspect you all know why you're here, but we are going to be doing an hour with Terry Brooks. And I am your host. My name is Cliff Samuels. I am the guest liaison for When Words Collide, and I'm also the Aurora Awards administrator. But this hour will be devoted to Terry, finding out more about him, his books. He is the author, of course, of the Shannara series, the Landover series, and his latest series, Child of Light. And that's actually got a new book coming out on October the 11th, Daughter of Darkness. So welcome, Terry.
Thank you, Cliff. By the way, that would be the fourth
series. What is the one is the one I'm missing?
They moved it up. It's the same book, but they moved it up a week.
Ah, excellent. So many books are actually coming out late, and having one coming out early is quite unusual.
Well, it's a long story and it's boring. So just let's say it's the mechanics of the business.
Okay, well, I'm going to, so people who want to ask questions later, there is the Q&A button, and that will be sent to us. And I will ask Terry, if the question hasn't already been brought up. But Terry, I'm going to do a question that is something that I noticed recently. Your first book I ever read of yours was the first in the Landover.
Oh, Magic Kingdom.
Magic Kingdom. This is like a first edition, signed by you, a treasured possession of mine. I loved the book, and I reread it recently, and I noticed that your lead character, was a lawyer. He's going to a magical kingdom. All his coworkers think he's totally deranged. This can't be happening. When you became a writer and went to write fantasy, and you were a lawyer before, did you have a similar experience? Did you have your coworkers kind of look at you kind of crazy?
Yeah, I don't know how crazy they thought I was. They were concerned about my ability to sustain the success of the first three books. And all during the period of time that I was doing this, which was from 1977 with the publication of Sword until I moved into Magic Kingdom, the questions were always pretty much the same. And they went like this: Terry, you still intend to practice law, don't you? You're going to stay with the firm, aren't you? And I'd say, well, that's my plan at the moment, sure. And then it would go from there into discussions about the reliability of the publishing business and some other types of things about this. And I remember, because when I made the decision to terminate was when I wrote Magic Kingdom, and a number of things happened all at once. And I just walked into a Monday morning meeting and said, well, this is it. I'm done. I'm going to finish out the summer and then I'm leaving. So whatever plans need to be made, you can start doing them right now, because this is a firm decision. And there were looks of astonishment. And I wanted to say, you know how many books I've sold already? Have you been looking at anything? I said, I would be thought crazy if I didn't terminate at this point and go off and see if I could make a career of this. And that's really what I want to do.
What type of law did you practice?
Oh, small town, everything. You name it, I've done it. In a small town, you take whatever comes through the door and you figure, if you don't know how to do it, you look up how to do it and do some research and figure it out that way. But that's what I liked about the law practice, was the diversity that you could encounter and the different kinds of challenges you were presented every single day. So I always thought that being, say, practicing estate law, where all you did was deal with dead people's remains, whatever they might be, was kind of boring. But I liked the trial work. I liked the small time stuff, nickel and dime stuff. I liked it all. If it was, in court, if there was some direct participation, if it required me to look something up and see what was going on, that was the challenge that made it worthwhile. Sort of like writing.
Yeah. Well, I guess it gave Ben, your character, a lot of knowledge when he has to rule a kingdom.
Yeah, when I started out with this idea, I was pretty sick of Shannon of it because I've been doing it for, well, about 15 years at that point of actual writing. So I flew to New York and I talked to my editor, Lester Del Rey, and I said, well, I want to do this something new. And I said, do you have any ideas? And he says, no. He says, well, don't you have some ideas? And I said, well, yeah, but nothing concrete. Do you have something? And he says, well, I might have. He says, but I'm not sure it's right for you. And I said, well, why don't you tell me what it is and we can talk about it. And he says, okay, I'll tell you. And he says, so there's this guy, he's living in this small town, and he finds a advertisement in a catalog that tells him he has an opportunity to buy a magic kingdom and become the king. And he thinks this can't be true, but on the other hand, he's intrigued because his life isn't going the way he wanted it to go. So he takes a flyer on it. He says, that's all I've got on it so far. And I said, well, all right, that sounds good. I kind of like it. Why don't you give it to me? He says, no, I don't think you're right for it. You shouldn't do it. I said, well, yeah, but give me a chance to try it. And he said, no, it's not right for you. So we went back and forth like that for a while as he drew the hook in. And finally he said, okay, I'll give it to you for a year. He says, if you write the book in a year, it's yours. I'll back away. If you don't get it done, it comes back to me. So I said, I can do this. And I remember thinking, I didn't have an idea for it, but I liked the concept. So on the way back home on an airplane, flying back to Illinois from New York, I sat there and I thought, what can I do with this story? And I thought, well, who is this guy? And I thought, he's unhappy with his life. He'd have to be unhappy to want to make this change. And it's a gamble. Who would take this chance? And I thought, well, a lawyer would take a chance like this. So I'll make him a lawyer. And then it kind of went from there. But it ended up being that kind of story. And that's how the whole thing came about.
Wow. Now you were talking about Lester Del Rey. I mean, I never got a chance to meet him. I know he was an amazing powerhouse. I mean, he made Del Rey books, he and his wife, Judy.
Yes.
What was it like to work with him?
Well, you had to develop a thick skin because he pulled no punches, shall we say, about what he didn't like. And I remember that one of the things I learned early on in when I was still fiddling around with trying to learn the craft was that you had to be good with descriptions. And you had to lay the scenery out, and you had to lay the setting out, and you had to do all this. And so I got into that. And early on, I think it was in my second book when I was writing it, and I sent him the manuscript afterwards. He read it for a while, and then he wrote back and he said, and he'd written on the pages the things that bothered him, and he had X's drawn through several of the pages in bold detail where I'd done some descriptions of what the scenery was like, what the feel of the place was like. And he said, not one more goddamn weather description, please. That was his approach. But he was tough to work with, but he was the thing about Lester was he was very intent on explaining to you why you were wrong, and he would do it. And he always told me, if you don't agree with me, tell me. He said, if you can convince me I'm wrong, if you can explain to me why I'm wrong, he said, I'll back off. Well, that was a one-way street, if ever there was one. But he was good about saying, think through everything you're doing and be prepared to defend it, which is very much a debate tactic that I'm very familiar with for the years I was involved in high school and college debate. So,
Well, also as a lawyer.
Well, as a lawyer too, it's the same idea. You have to be prepared to stand on your feet and defend yourself. One of the things I tell readers now when I'm talking to them, younger readers, everybody's younger than I am, younger readers who are involved in becoming established writers and getting out in the field and so forth. And I tell them, look, when I was starting out, the marching orders I had were very simple. Write your next book. And when you're done with that one, write your next book. And when you say to me, you would like to go out on the road and promote, the answer is no. He says, when you have written enough books and been successful enough with everything, I'll tell you, you're ready, you can go out on the road. He says, but be prepared to defend yourself when up to that point. I thought, oh, for God's sake. So I tell everybody now, now that everybody's on the road, and Lester is undoubtedly rolling over in his grave, and that so much of the publicity work has come back to be on the shoulders of the writer than it used to be, and you're really responsible. You better be prepared before you go out to stand up in public and talk like a human being, and be committed to the effort, and to be a personable kind of guy. Don't get up there and not know what to say, or be confused about what you're trying to explain, but be conversant and with your work. And so that really stood me in good stead ever since I started, when he finally let me go out on the road.
Now, I heard a rumor that there's going to be another Landover book. Is that something soon or further in the future?
Well, it is not a firm thing, and I'm liking the idea less and less. I think I'm done with Magic Kingdom. There was a movie contract, I think, since I was born on this particular subject. It feels like it at this point. It's been through 5 studios. It's been rewritten by everybody you could think of. It has starred many well-known actors at various times for brief moments, but it's kind of languishing at this point. And I'm just thinking, even I don't care anymore about doing this thing. So I just feel like I always said I was going to do that 7th book when they made the movie, so I had something to support it. But I'm thinking now probably not going to happen, and I've gone in other directions, and I've got this new series, and so I don't know. I don't think it's going to happen though.
Quick thing for everybody. I gather that the Q&A button didn't show up. So if you want to put questions into the chat, please do it that way, and then we can take them from there. Now, talking about film, how are you? You were part of the production for the Shannara TV series. The visuals were great. I mean, it really did show that this is a future world after a Holocaust. How are you with that? Did you have much say in the writing and the stories, or?
Well, I did not grow up on a farm and not ever go away. So I knew going into the project that I was going to have minimal participation, even if it was written in blood, that I would have control of everything, which it wasn't anyhow. But what happened for me was that I had some principles going in as to what I thought should happen and not happen. And most of what I wanted to protect, I was able to protect. But the trouble is that the MTV people had one vision of what was going to happen, which they talked about, which was that, oh, you were going to get all these young readers, you're going to bring in all these people. And I said, just be careful. I've been around a while, and my once young readers are now in their 30s and 40s. And the bulk of my audience are, middle-aged adults at this point. And I don't draw kids in the way I used to, because the competition is different out there in the field of bookdom, and because there's a lot more competition, and so on and so forth. But they didn't believe me, and sure enough, when they got about halfway through that first season and screened where their audience was, there they were, 30s and 40s, the bulk of the audience. And so they wanted to find ways to bring a younger audience in. And I just threw up my hands and thought, oh, great, this will never happen. And it really didn't. So at the end of the first season, MTV lost interest in that and just basically passed it on to a peripheral producer, and just said, you do something with this. And they really didn't do anything with it. They created their own story from Elfstones that wasn't even right. So had to go away.
It's like with so many things. Now, you got a new series, The Child of Light. Book 1 is out. Book 2 is coming out in October. How's the reception for that one been?
Well, you know, this is when you begin to learn about life in the reality is, you know, I'm almost 80 years old, and I have been around for what, 50 years almost, I think, as a professional writer, and longer, much longer than that, just writing. I thought I had this all figured out. And the way I had it figured out was that if you're getting crappy reviews, and I got a lot of crappy reviews with the Shanara series, some of them were good, but a lot of them were bad. And it felt like, you know, I couldn't buy a decent review from certain, you know, Publisher Weekly, a couple of those. And it was, but, you know, I was selling books hand over fist. So what do I care? You know, you don't like the book? Too bad. You're a reviewer. Doesn't bother me. I'm still selling the books. So that was true right up to the end of the series. And then I went into Child of Light after a short detour off into another book that's not been had anything done with it yet. And I wrote Child of Light in a flash of, I don't know what, euphoria, something of that sort. I was just enamored of this story. And I wrote it in 4 months. So you can tell I was really on top of it, and I just loved it. And I gave it to my wife, who is usually very critical, and she said, this is a terrific book. Then I gave it to my editor and my agent and everybody else under the sun, and they all said, this is a great book. Got great reviews from everybody that it went to, but it didn't sell the way the way that the Shannon series did. So this, I can tell you, truly pissed me off no end. But I thought, okay, so that's the way it is. You have to build it back up again, write the next book. So I wrote the next book, which is Daughter of Darkness, which comes out this October. So Daughter of Darkness was equally, I was very excited about it, but it was a tougher go the second time, because you can only create those special times, like when you write a book like Running with the Demon or Elfstones, perhaps, which really capture everything right off the bat. And once again, everything, a repeat of the first one. And I'm waiting here now to see if it's going to do better in the sales department, now that it's had the first book to kind of pave the way. I've seen a lot of people at different venues now that have said, we just love that book. So you're going to do terrific with this next one. We'll just see.
Now, okay, it looks like there's a few questions coming in. Okay, what advice would you give to fantasy authors new to the genre? That's a pretty broad question.
How much time we got here?
Is there like a number one thing that, I mean, other than stick with it and keep writing and don't give in to the thoughts that you're not going to be there? Because I know first-time writers, they need that extra encouragement. Because
this is the keynote speech I gave yesterday. Where was this person when I gave my keynote speech?
Well, if they want to see that keynote, of course, it is recorded, and they can
go. Then they should. They should
go back.
They get a much better.
Is there a primary one that, you know, from your keynote say this is what you should, you know, a thing to focus on at the beginning?
Well, I'll tell you what I was always told by my editor, Lester Del Rey, back in the day. Now it's been so long ago, it's almost like, you know, it's been written in script. But the way scripture, I should say, I think it's a good piece of advice. His advice was, I wrote a suggestion for a story, and he got it back, and he says, this is, you know, you're writing about the whole world here. This is too much. It's too much. You don't need to reinvent the wheel here. You just need to do what? Tell a good story. He said, there's your focus on everything you do forever. Make sure you've got a good story. Now, how you get that good story is hard work, of course, and creating the right characters and living that in your head and making it so much a part of you, you can't stop thinking about it. That's how you do it. But I don't know, everybody's got a different set of rules and format for getting that job done. So it's very hard to give anybody a quick fix on it.
Okay, Trent has an interesting question. Says that I think Gran Ohmsford is the most powerful character you created. At what point did you realize you had created such a dynamic character?
That's a good question, and she is a very dynamic character. Here's another story that goes on a little ways, but I'll try and close it up. After I got through writing Voyage of Gerald Shanara, I decided I wanted to write a story based on whether or not you can sin so deeply and so far that there is no possibility of redemption. Because all of our literature, biblical sorts, in anything says there's always redemption available. You just have to ask for it. You just have to earn it, something. And I thought, well, is that true? Who believes this? Outside the church, who actually believes that you can be forgiven no matter what you do under all circumstances? And I thought, well, I don't know that I think this is true, but I think it's worth writing a book about, and write a character who's sympathetic, but also has transgressed so far. She's an assassin, she's killed all these people. She has been a bad person for a long time, but she was subverted as a child. So is there forgiveness, and what can she do to earn it? And so I wrote that first set of books in whatever it was. I forgot it myself at this point. At any rate, in that first set of books, where, well, I guess that was Voyage of Gerald Shanara, where she was Gran Omsford, and she was on her way to redeeming herself by doing something that was going to help her relocate with her brother, who she thought she'd lost forever, and to go on to become the High Druid of Shanara. And I thought, well, there you go. So I put her in that position. And then I thought, after I wrote this whole thing, she was redeemed in her own mind and in the mind of those who were close to her. But what would people in general think about this? Is this sufficient? We go from being televangelists to committing all kinds of sins. And then we come out and say, well, I found Jesus again and I'm saved. That's not what I think happens. So in any case, I wrote the next set of 3, and in which she is almost killed and the Druid order destroyed, because those within the order become fed up with her and say, she's not worthy of any of this, let's get rid of her. So, and then it goes on for 3 more than that, but there's no point in going any further. You get the idea that I was trying to figure out in my own head if there was a way that she could gain the redemption that she deserved, that she had done enough to be forgiven. And then I closed it out in The Last Druid, which was the end of the series, and where I thought there was some kind of resolution to her situation. But for me, that's the way I write my books. That's in a microscopic look at what I do. I try to capture the essence of what it is for something to happen or not happen the way we see it in this world, in a world of magic. So it's in a different setting. You erase all of your prejudices and thoughts, and you look at it in a different light entirely. And once you've got it in that different light, you have a chance to see how somebody else deals with this and what kind of a conclusion they come up with. And is there, in fact, any sort of recovery? So that was all about that whole thing with Gran.
And that was actually one of my questions that I had written was, did you ever have, or have you had a minor character that literally didn't want to stay a minor character, became much more of a major character and took their own role, told you they wanted to be more than just, a third bit player?
Yeah, I know. I always tell people I don't let the inmates take over the asylum. So I'm very careful about keeping them in their place. But every so often you devise a character that as you're writing that character, it grows in stature. I don't say you become enamored with that character. I get worried about that because that's happened to a few good writers that turned out to be really bad. So I say, what you have to do is look at the way the character might develop, and in what way can you show that character in a different light or a more full light where it would reveal something. So I picked the gnome in, I don't know what story it was. I can't remember. Oh, it was in Wish Song. I can't think of its name right now, but I thought, well, you've kicked those gnomes all over the place. They're dwarves. All those small people get kicked around. Just because you're small doesn't mean you should be kicking everybody else who's small around. So I thought, well, all right, let's see how I can develop this character. I kind of like it. And I like the idea of this character being despised as worthless and kind of a participant. early on, but finding a way of his own and turning out to be very important in the resolution of the story. And when something like that happens, it can be revelatory, and it can give you a whole new light on how the world operates. And I thought, well, this was important to show, because a lot of the time the people we think are less capable or least capable even are the ones that turn out to have the most to offer in any situation.
Now, Inga actually had a question on how do you manage the backstory with your editor? And I suspect with Lester, that wasn't going to happen no matter what.
How do I manage it? Well, the editors I have now, or I've had since Lester, I've had 4 or 5, 3 or 4. I don't know. Anyway, right now I have Ann Grohl. Ann Grohl is very easy to work with because, well, she's not easy to work with. She's hard to work with. She's tough. And she insists that you do things in a way that makes sense. And if you can't explain yourself, then you can be in trouble. And I told her this early on, interestingly enough, when she says, I said to her, I just want you to know, this was our first meeting, I said, I just want you to know, I want you to be hard on me. I want you to not back off because of my reputation or anything else. I want you to be difficult. And I want you to question what I'm doing. And I want you to tell me if you think I'm, doing something wrong. She said, well, how often do you publish? And I said, well, 1 book a year. She says, great, that'll be a change after George. So I said, okay. And I got the picture right away. Write your books, turn them in on time. I've got time to work on them. I'll take care of it. And that's what she's done. And I find that it's all a reasonable kind of thing. My editors are my friends. They're not my enemies. They're not the people who try to figure out ways to get me out of publishing. They're there to help. So I listen to them pretty closely. And if they've got a valid point, I will try to find a way to address it in a reasonable way. I don't just throw up my hands and say, well, I don't like that. What I did was the right way, and that's the way we're going to do it. I find in a lot of situations, it doesn't make that much difference because it's not crucial to the way the story is running. So you can afford to back off and just try to find that common ground where you can both survive, because you're working together, for crying out loud. It's not like they're the enemy. They're not trying to put you out of business. They're trying to keep you in the business because that's how the company makes money. So, you have to appreciate what they're trying to do here. And it's not ruin your record as a writer.
Very, very well put. Allison actually has I guess it's a 2-part question. Your first fantasy book that you read, or science fiction book that you read, and what writers actually influenced you the most when you were a child?
Oh, well, The Wizard of Oz was probably the first one I read. As I look back, I read the whole Oz series when I was, 8 or 9, something like that. I can't remember anymore. I read those first, then I read H.G. Wells, a lot of science fiction, and I don't know, there were various books around those. I read a lot of dog and horse stories too at that age. I don't know why. I just liked those stories. I wanted to see that nothing bad happened to the dog. So I read a lot of those stories. But when I got into and I was not really starting out, when I started out writing stuff, which when I was 10, I was not working in fantasy at all. I was working in the Great White Whale story again, or All Quiet on the Western Front, or things of that sort, none of which were working, by the way. And I actually wrote a science fiction book, very exciting, called Space Opera. It just resonates when you hear that title. And that went, the way of the rest of it. But when I got into college, I was really caught up with William Faulkner's approach to storytelling, how insular everything was, how people in different social, economical levels worked against each other, basically to find ways to ruin one another or to disparage one another, whatever. There was that competition going all the time. And at the same time, I read Lord of the Rings, which is a variation on that whole theme anyway. So I thought, well, I love the format for Lord of the Rings. I'm going to try something with that, which is why I wrote Sword of Shannara. and why I carried over into it a lot of what I'd learned from reading William Faulkner. And then went from there. And then after that, I did read a lot of fantasy. I really got into it big time after that because I had a reason to educate myself with what was out there.
Okay, one I think was forwarded to me from L.A. Smith. What were your biggest challenges when you were writing your next series after Shannara? In case, did you find to get out of the mindset you've been writing Shannara for decades?
Yeah.
How did you get into the new mindset of a new series and not think of Shannara type characters?
By the time I had written Last Druid, I was pretty sick of Shannara. Let's start with that. I had done all I wanted to do. I was fed up to the teeth with the whole thing. I thought this has to be the end because I was not going to write another book in this and have it come off as a good book. It would never have worked. So I had to find something else to write. And I did. I went off and wrote a book called Sky Mountain. And I finished it up and sent it in. And my editor said, interesting, but perhaps not there yet. Maybe you should think about it some more. So she sent it back. And about that time, COVID came along. So here I am now down at the beach in Oregon, and I can't go anywhere. I can't do anything. I'm on a beach. I can go out and freeze to death in the Pacific Ocean if I feel like it, but it's not exactly Hawaii. So I just felt like I had to go in a different direction, do a different thing, and I fiddled around with a whole bunch of stuff, and then. One night I just sat down and I said, I'm going to write a sentence that anybody who reads the first sentence of this book, they will not be able to stop. They will have to go on to see what else is going. The other writer that does this is Naomi Novik, and she's great at it. But anyway, so I wrote that first sentence, and it had to do with somebody in a prison planning an escape. And I thought, that's it. Let's say, first of all, and the person doesn't know why they're in the prison, and they don't understand what their whole life is about, and everything they think is true about themselves is wrong. Lay it all out in the first chapter and go. And I'll bet no one will put that down. So I wrote it, and that's the one I wrote in 4 months because I was really on top of it. And I feel like I just gave it enough time, and I did give it the better part of a year and a half where I just kind of fiddled around with different things to find that first sentence, that concept of the storyline that I felt would be compelling enough and more in keeping with what I write, because that's the kind of story I write, basically an adventure story that once you're in it, and you do not stop turning the pages. I told everybody over the years that if you can quit reading my book because you have to go to work the next morning, I have failed. I don't want that. I want you to be, you don't care anymore. You're reading this book to the end. So that's my marching orders, and I felt like I accomplished it here. And really, you're always looking for a way to top what you did before, and at the same time not go off the boards in the process, which is it's a little tricky, but after 42 books, I have some experience with how to maintain my balance.
Yes, definitely. Trent had a question. It's another Shannara question. He says, why did you choose not to have organized religion in Shannara, in the world?
Well,
that's a tricky thing to even create.
It is a good question. I guess because I wasn't interested enough in the concept of organized religion as a part of the story. I mean, I've read Dune, I've read all the important stories where that is so crucial to the story, but I did not want to write that story. I wanted to stay far away as possible from that particular aspect of the story. I wanted to deal strictly with the human element and the ways in which magic impacts the human element of the stories I was writing. So I just really, when I touched on it in ways that I felt were required or advanced the story in a measurable way, but otherwise I just stayed away from it. I didn't see any point in including that particular aspect. It's such a hot button topic, number one. And if there's any criticism these days that I would strip away right away, it's the whole religious or non-religious criticism, because it's everywhere. I don't like this. This isn't the word of God. Well, who in the hell knows at this point what's what in that particular aspect of things? There are beliefs all over the world as to what's true. And there's truth in all of them, I'm sure. But the whole idea of saying that one religion has it right and nothing else does denigrates everything we know is true about society and the way it works. And I just decided I was not going to be part of it. I was going to keep my stories true to what I believe and to what I see to be true about the world, and leave out all the things that I thought didn't have an important aspect in the kind of story that I was trying to tell.
Okay.
I'll suffer for this down the road, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Randy, not McCharles, a different Randy.
Okay.
This is a tricky question. And this is always the one I seem to find that people ask me at a job interview when I was looking for a job. I'm retired now, thank goodness. What was your biggest mistake as an author? That's a tough one.
Well, the second book,
even to admit to one.
I don't know, the second book I wrote was a huge mistake because it got turned down. And I had to live with the fact that I'd written a book that right after Sword of Shannara that Lester said was a terrible book, and I had to start over from scratch. That was hard to accept, although he gave me enough reasons for it that had to do with the failure of the story to live up to its potential. So that was pretty hard to deal with. Oh, I don't know. I don't have a lot of, I can't, I'm not the kind of writer who can stand up there and say, well, I've suffered, I've had failures. I haven't. I've been enormously successful right from the first book, for crying out loud. And I don't want to whine around about things that were troubling to me, because there aren't many of them that are really worth anybody's consideration. For me, writing has been a very successful life. So I think I'll just say I don't have anything for that.
That's a good point. Lester Del Rey was not just a mentor, an editor. He was a mentor. He really helped. I know with the one book that you have said, and I've read the intro and one of you in the beginning of it, that you went back and you reworked it and you made it an amazing book. But yeah, sometimes you need somebody to give you a little nudge in the right way. And he was one, I gather, gave you a lot of advice and a lot of direction. And he didn't just sort of say, don't like it, go figure it out yourself. He would push you in interesting ways, right?
He would. He had a good way of doing it too. It was interesting. He was always challenging me to solve things, but he would do it by saying things that suggested to me he was really saying, can't you work this out on your own? What's your problem? You're a successful author. Go solve the problem, or offering up his first trick. The thing is that he ran through a series of things in the Sword of Shannara. When I was getting that back, I was a first-time author, so I really was, woefully ignorant about everything, and he knew that. So he didn't really beat up on me tremendously. But what he would do is I would write a scene that he didn't like, and he'd say, I don't think you're capturing it here. I think you need to do it again. So I would do it again, and I would make it pretty much the same thing, thinking that would be sufficient. And he would come back and he would say, look, let me write it for you. And he would write something truly awful and say, we'll put this in. And I'd say, no, never mind, I'll do it. And I'd go back and I'd get it right every single time. And he did that a couple different times with me, where it just infuriated me, but it got me writing it the way it should have been written. And it was a very helpful thing. In the latter days, I learned a few things about how to do stuff, so it didn't become so prevalent as it was after. But he was with me for the first 8 books of the Shannara series. So that was really my bread and butter. That was my learning period. That was where I groomed myself to be a successful author, from being just somebody who thought it would be interesting to be a writer. And he was the one that saw to it that I got on the path and stayed on it.
Sounds like he was almost like a bit of a devil's advocate. He would give you suggestions that he knew you would never take, or you would take the challenge.
Yeah, I don't know if I ever took one of them, what he would have done, but I never did. So I had to be satisfied with that. And because, you know, he was a curmudgeon, but I really liked Lester. I really liked him. I got along with him well. I learned early on that if you picked a fight with Lester, be prepared, because what he would do, and he did this for fun. And I watched him do it at dinners, and he did it at dinners when my wife was present too. And she talked about it with me afterward. He said, "You see what he did to you? Did you see what he did?" And what he would do is he would start an argument. You know, could be about anything. It could be about cutlery. It could be about the taste of the meat. It could be about, you know, whatever. He'd start it. And he would continue the argument with you by asking you questions and going on and on and on. And he would work it until he got you to change your mind without realizing it and be on the other side of the argument. And he was a master at it. And then he would suddenly grin and you'd realize what he'd just done. It was infuriating, but it was also a very tender thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I liked him, and I loved Judy Lindell Ray. She was a terrific person.
Well, I mean, it used to be when your books first started coming out that you bought everything that they published.
Mm.
Every author that came out was a gem.
Mm-hmm.
And, that is a true sign of an amazing editor. Got a question here, and I think you actually kind of answered that at either the keynotes or the readings. Is there anything you really want to write but have never done it? Something that you feel that you might be missing out? Please don't tell me you've always wanted to write that great romance novel.
No, whatever the next book is, that'll be it. My goal is to write every book as if it was the first thing I was doing of that kind. And it's going to be the most exciting. I tell myself, I really do. This is going to be my best book. This is always what I think when I'm writing the book. It may not be that at all. And it may not turn out as well as I would have liked. I don't know. There's all kinds of things that can happen in the process. But at least my marching orders were always the same. This will be your best book. This will be important. Get it right. And so that's it. But I got asked yesterday when I was doing the keynote, I guess it was during the question session, if I'd ever wished I would have written in a different area, or if there was another area I would like to be successful in. And I said, no, I'm perfectly happy doing what I'm doing. Otherwise, I wouldn't still be doing it. And, you know, I'm not doing this like I'm enslaved and have no choice to do anything else. I could do some other things. But this is, you know, fantasy lets you do everything. There are no boundaries on fantasy as long as you play within the rules of what's supposed to happen and not happen. And if I can do that, then I'm perfectly happy to make this my career. End of story.
Yeah, we've had a 5-minute heads up. I'm going to ask a quick question, and hopefully it might be our last question. But you've just recently come out with a short story collection. You mostly write long. Are you more comfortable writing a long fiction, or how does it come about that you've only written a small number of short works? Are you more comfortable just sitting in with a bigger canvas, or?
Yes, that's how I work. I want a big canvas. I want lots of space to scroll around on. And for me, a short story is 50 to 75 pages. That's a short story. I can't do anything less than that. So I always get carried away with myself, I suppose, but I don't look to do anything. I find short stories hard. They're hard to write for me because I do want to sprawl all over the place. And then before I know it, I'm up to 100 pages. And what am I supposed to do then? It's too late for a short story. And that's kind of the way I look at it.
I mean, your books are, I would personally call them a comfortable size. They're not massive door stoppers that, so you've got 300-400 page books, which I find more comfortable personally for reading. How do you, time-wise, I mean, when you were writing the Shannara books, the process to writing the book and then editing and all the rest, is that normally for you a year for that, or what? Break down each, maybe, how long does it normally take to write that.
It's not the same as it used to be. When I started out, it was much slower. It took me 7 years to do the Sword of Shannara. It took 3 years to do Elfstones. It took another couple, 2, 3 years to do Wish Song. Then I started to go to a book a year when I started with Magic Kingdom. And then when I went back into the Shannara series, it was a book a year. And I've stayed on that level. The trick is to get a year ahead. Start with that. And I did that back in the early 90s. I got a year ahead so that I was turning in the book that would publish at that time the following year. So I had that space in there to work with. And it was kind of a freeing thing to say, well, look, I got all this free space, but I didn't let it waste it. I just went right to work on the next book. And that is a fairly easy level for me to operate at, which I'd learned by then. I can do a book. I can do a 400 or 500 page book in a year. I can do that and not, rush things or cheat about the time and effort that it requires or have a smooth ride or any of that stuff. None of that necessarily is going to happen, but that's what it takes to get it done. And for me, I'm always proofing as I go. I do a lot of proofing. I write something and I go right back and proof it. Then I'll move on to the next chapter and I do the same thing. And sometimes I'll work, page to page, just depends on how I'm feeling. But that's what works for me. And for everybody, it's different. Everybody has a different format that works for them or doesn't.
Now I'm going to do a real quick question. We only got like about a minute to go. Do you use any special tools? Like, are you just a word processor type person? Do you use Scrivener?
No, I'm that guy who started on an Apple IIe and still writes as if he's writing on an Apple IIe. I have a bigger screen. I have more complex abilities. I use some of them, but not most of them. I was started with, I tell everybody I took 2 things out of high school that became important in my life. The first one was public speaking. I was good at public speaking. I was competitive at it, and I got to a point where I was comfortable with it. The other one was I learned how to type. And that was just because I was going to a college where they required everything in typing. So I thought, well, I better learn. So I took a summer course on how to be a typist, and I was pretty good at it. So my fingers worked, and so I got that done. And those were the 2 things that I took with me, and that's about as successful as I've gotten. I don't understand computers. I have a son who is a computer expert, so I call him up, or I call up Sean Speakman, my web druid, and ask him to solve the problem for me.
It's always good to have those people on hand.
You have to have millions.
I'm not sure you want to say that about your son, but yeah, Sean, I know has done a lot of wonderful stuff with your websites, and he's been a big part of your life. Terry, this has been great. We have come to the end of our 50 minutes, our sort of minimized hour.
All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being with us today. I hope we answered a lot of questions for people. If you wanted more, Terry did a reading the other day. That's on our YouTube channel for WWC. And he also did his keynote speeches, which are also up on our YouTube channel. So if you want more of Terry, go there. Thank you, everybody. We will see you at another panel.
Thank you, Cliff.
Thank you, Terry. That was wonderful. And thank you all the people who joined us today.
Yes,
great questions. And yes, you used all my questions. I definitely needed extra ones because they gave me.
Wow, that's perfect.
Yes, excellent. Well, I'm going to go off. I have to prepare for the Ed Willett reading.
Oh yeah,
or not reading, interview.
Ed will keep you hopping.
The man of many talents.
Yes, indeed.
I've known Ed for many years, so
yeah,
this will be fun. Thank you, Terry. And someday, hopefully, we'll get you back to Calgary.
I miss it. I tell you, I was looking very much for the last 3 to 4 years, I guess it was. I was supposed to come up there. And then it got canceled out each year because of COVID. But as soon as there's an opportunity and somebody sends me an invite, I'll come back up.
Sounds good. Terry, have yourself a great rest of the day. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.